What's happening, model makers? It's a little bit of a slow day here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises because I am at a good spot to kind of pause on some projects, and that means it's video making day. And so I thought that today would be a good day to tackle a video project that I've had in my head for quite a while. If you follow my nonsense, you may remember that not too long ago I did a video that I called the first in a series of model making fundamentals videos, and that video was a roundup of all different kinds of filler materials that I use, and just a basic overview of the characteristics of each and the pros and cons of using different things and strategies for deciding which. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with these model making fundamentals videos. This is not new information. Lots of people have covered all this stuff before, but as I said at the time that I made the first one, I just kind of want to have this stuff as part of my video library on my channel to just kind of round out the catalog of stuff that I've got here for people to watch. So anyway, with all that said, I am gonna tackle subject number 2 of model making fundamentals. And I felt like that since subject number 1 was a roundup of fillers, that subject number 2, which sort of, I think, logically follows directly on its heels, would be a discussion of abrasives, sandpaper, sanding sticks, all of those kinds of things. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, well, what is there really to talk about? It's sandpaper. And I think that, I certainly felt that way at one time as well. But the fact is, there's more to it, like there is with most of these things. And I think that there's good information that you may not be aware of that you might find useful when it comes to choosing sandpapers, understanding grits, and looking at different options for what type of sanding tools you might want to use. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through some stuff I've got all laid out here on my bench, a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. And so let's get straight to it. Okay, first things first. This is not going to be an exhaustive review of every type of sanding tool available because there's lots of them. There's lots of different options. It's just one of those things where everybody has sort of their favorite way of tackling what can sometimes be a very laborious task. And, each person develops their preference for how they like to do it. But I think that there are some things that are pretty common to all of them, and that is the sandpaper itself. So I'm going to start with that. There's basically 2 kinds of sandpaper out there. There's wet or dry paper, and then there's paper that's strictly to be used dry only. Now, the best way to tell the difference, if you're not familiar, is that wet or dry paper is typically gray in color, like this stuff is here in my handy-dandy sandpaper pouch. And the reason that it is gray is because it is more often than not made from aluminum oxide. That's the material that's used to provide the abrasive coating. Now, it also tends to have paper backing that is blue or gray or kind of tan. And that's because the paper is specifically made not to disintegrate when you get it wet. Now, the other type of paper, purely dry paper, tends to be orange in color for the most part. And that's because the material that's used often for that type of paper is garnet, which is basically a mineral that's a type of sand. So it is literally sandpaper. And that paper tends to be a lot stiffer and doesn't fold as well, and it'll definitely come apart on you if you get it wet. Now, you really don't have to worry too much about getting them mixed up, honestly, because most of the dry-only sandpapers are intended for woodworking use, and they are much coarser than what you're typically going to want to deal with for scale modeling applications. So I don't even have any of that stuff to show you. Everything I have here is just good old wet or dry stuff. But if you're at the local hardware store and trying to figure it out, just kind of remember that the wet or dry is always going to be this gray stuff, and to stay away from the orange sandpaper. Now, within sandpaper itself, you will see some different kinds of things that are available. I have here a pretty good collection of what is literally sandpaper. Okay, it's an abrasive coating on top of a paper backing. But you can also get sanding films, and they're kind of interesting. And this is a good example of a sanding film. This stuff is an abrasive coating on what's basically a mylar sheet. And so it definitely works wet or dry. It's got its own unique characteristics. As you can see, it's kind of nice and floppy. And so it behaves in its own particular way when you're trying to get it to conform over a surface. I personally don't find a whole lot of advantage to it over regular paper. And in fact, one thing that I prefer about regular paper is that once you get it wet and you start working with it quite a bit, the paper softens up and you get what's almost more like a little bit of a sanding cloth that conforms nicely to all sorts of situations. And it's easy to fold it and roll it and do whatever you need to do in order to make it work for you. So again, sanding film's kind of cool, but if I were going to go back and buy some again, well, I suppose I probably wouldn't. Now, the next thing that I use, and actually I should say, I don't use just paper a whole lot. Paper is nice for open, flat surfaces, like the roof of a car body, for example. But I don't find that just a sheet of paper has applications that much the rest of the time. And that's because I'm usually trying to get at a particular area in a way that just doesn't lend itself to a flat sheet of paper. What I use by far the most are sanding sticks. And I've got a little collection of those, of different ones here. And look, these things come in all different flavors. You can get them from pretty much any model making supply. And you can even get them from your local nail salon. And a lot of people swear by them. The ones that are specifically made for nail salons, I think, tend to be a little less expensive. I don't personally have any experience with them because I just never really have found a good source for them. I'm sure you can get them on Amazon or whatever, but for me it was just as easy to get sanding sticks that were purposely made for the job. Although it's kind of, I think, silly to say that, because look, abrasive is abrasive. There really is no such thing as sanding tools that are specifically made for scale modeling. These are just, nail files that have somebody else's brand name attached to them for the most part. Now, I will say, however, there is an exception, and that's with these sanding sticks or these thinny sticks from Ultimate Modeling Products. Those guys, I feel like, designed these specifically with scale modelers in mind for a couple of reasons. One is that you've got the wide end and the narrow end, which is cool because you can get into tighter spots with the narrow end. But what I really like about these is that because they're so long and flexible, so you can bend them pretty easily, that depending on where you grab onto it, you can get more or less spring force, and that dictates how much pressure you're putting on the surface that you're sanding. And that's kind of nice. I like that. The one thing that I don't like, and I always give them a hard time about this, is that they kind of only come in two different grits. This is a 240 grit, and this other one is a 1200 grit. And those cover a lot of ground. There's not a whole lot more you need besides that, but I wish that they had something in between, kind of like a 400. Now, I've also got this one, which is pretty handy. I use sometimes. It's got 4 different grits on one file, which can be useful at times. It's pretty stiff, doesn't flex the way that the other ones do, but it's useful for certain things. These are kind of nice because they're shaped to help you get into difficult to reach areas as well. But there's lots and lots of sanding sticks out there. You just have to find the ones that work best for you. Now, the next category of sanding tools that I like a lot and that I use very frequently are sanding sponges. And lots of people sell these as well. I think I got these from Micro Mark. I like them because they are large enough that they're easy to hold. They're stiff enough that if I want to maintain a flat surface, I can, but they will also conform. You can see that they're squishy enough. So if, for example, I'm sanding across the top of a fuselage, I don't automatically leave a flat spot, and that's kind of nice. There are other sanding tools out there that are made specifically for sanding round things that have like a sanding belt or a strip of sandpaper that stretches across like a fork, and it allows you to sand in such a way that it helps you maintain a curve. So those are handy as well, but I find that I like these sponges. These work well wet or dry, and so do the sanding sticks, by the way. I should have mentioned that. But these are nice. This one is a 240 grit, this one's a 320 grit, and I use them quite a lot. Got these things out of my toolbox probably on a daily basis. Now, one thing that I like to do with these is that as they wear out, I will cut chunks of them off. Like I've got here in this little bowl, I'll cut rectangular chunks of them off, and I'll use my gripper tweezers to hold on to them. And now I've got a little sanding foot that I can use to get into a tight area, like say, a wing root, for example, or any place that is just too difficult to mash some other sanding tool into. This is kind of a great solution. This is also really nice when I need to work around details on a surface. You got a flat surface with something sticking up right in the middle of it that you don't want to abuse with your sanding activities, and so you just use this to just kind of very carefully work around it. And gripper tweezers give you a good handle for that. Okay, now another thing that a lot of people like are sanding pads, and these specifically are micro mesh sanding pads. And these I got with my Novus polishing kit. And these go in grit all the way from, I think, 2400 all the way up to 12,000, I think is right. Let's see. Yep, there's the 2400. So you've got a complete range of those pads when you order them as a set. And these are kind of nice because even though they are on a sponge that is kind of squishy, it's relatively stiff. And I find myself using them a lot like this, where again, I'm using the flex and the springiness of the pad to dictate how much pressure I'm applying with the edge of it. And these are nice if I'm trying to work in a really controlled fashion where I want to work right up next to something with just the edge of it. These things are pretty handy. But I often find that not only do the ready-made sanding tools that I can get not being exactly what I want to get into a particular area or address something in a particular way, but they wear out, and you got to replace them. And I'm just like anybody. I don't like to throw money at things if I don't have to. So I've been looking at some other solutions, and one thing that I've found that I really have gotten to like a lot is sanding sponge pads, cloths, whatever you want to call it. And these are a little bit different from other sanding sponges. This particular product, for example, is from 3M. And these are really auto body products, and these are kind of nice because you can, as you can see, you can cut them to shape. You can glue them onto things. If you need to put a little wooden handle on it or something, you can sort of make your own sanding tool. And so these are pretty nice. One thing that I've found about these 3M cloths is that it's a little annoying because they don't really tell you what grit they are. They, as you can see, tell you that they are fine and super fine. And it's kind of hard to look at it and decide what grit it is. To me, that looks like about a 320. But I found that when I tried to use this, that it seemed to perform like something that was much coarser. So, to be honest, I haven't used these a whole lot. And my continuing search for the perfect sanding pad landed me on this, which is a fantastic product. This is an Abra sanding disc made by a company called Mirka. And as you can see, it's got the grit written on the back of it. It's got this soft, fuzzy surface on the back side of a really squishy sponge material. And at the abrasive side is this mesh cloth that's got an abrasive impregnated into it. And I really like these. They work wet or dry. And what I've done is, for times that I don't want to use them in one big piece, because you can cut them with scissors and shape them however you like. And so I'll use them a lot like this, but they're really flimsy for that. They're a lot softer than other sponges. So what I did is I made myself another little sanding foot. And this is just a chunk of styrene that's got some epoxy sculpt on it to create a little handle that I can grip with my fingers like that. And I put a piece of Velcro, the hook side of Velcro, on the bottom of it. And now I can just take a chunk of this Mirka sanding pad and stick it on there with the Velcro. And now I've got a very controllable sanding instrument that I can use that will help me not only maintain a flat surface, but it will conform to irregularities nicely as well. Now, one thing I have noticed about these is that because of the weave in the cloth that makes up the abrasive side, that you have to be careful and change directions a lot, because it will actually create a microscopic pattern of furrows that matches the open spacing of the weave. I kind of learned that the hard way when I was practicing with these, doing some polishing. But overall, these are a really cool product that I like a lot. I got this whole bag of these pads, which go from 500 to 4,000 grit, on Amazon for about $30, which is kind of expensive. But especially given how easy they are to wash out after you use them, that may not be a lifetime supply of sanding pads, but it's definitely going to last you a long time. Now, I mentioned before that these sanding sponges were one of my go-to tools and one of my favorites. And they are. And one of the things that I hate about them is that even though I can I can clean them off. And one way that I do that with all sanding tools, sanding sticks, sanding sponges, whatever, when they get clogged up like that, you can go wash them off in the sink. But if you don't have time for that, you can just take on your sleeve, and see that? You can just rub the dust off on the cloth of your shirt or your pants leg or whatever, and that cleans off probably 80% of it, and you can keep working and then go scrub them out in the sink with a toothbrush later on. But they do eventually become so clogged up and worn that they're not really that much good anymore. And it's annoying because you got to go and you got to order some more. So what I've decided is I want to make my own. And I've been doing some research and finding some foam that is similar or the same as the foam that these sponges are made from. And I think I finally located it, and this is called EVA foam. I found this from basically just doing Google searches for places that sell closed cell foam. What closed cell means is that unlike a sponge like this, hold on a second here. Okay, this is an open cell foam. If you put it in water, it's going to soak it up just like a normal sponge. But a closed cell foam, each one of those little cells is like a bubble. And so moisture can't permeate it, and that's what makes it good for a wet sanding sponge. But at any rate, this is pretty common stuff. And I found this from a place online that sells foam by the sheet, and I'm going to get some more of it, but this is just from my sample. And so you can see this EVA foam is about the same kind of squishy as this foam is, and I think this may also be just a colored EVA foam. And so what I've found is that I can use a simple adhesive. In this case, I used some of the foil adhesive made by Microscale, which looks and smells an awful lot like white glue, to stick a sheet of sandpaper onto the face of this sponge. And then I just trimmed around the edges, and now, boom, I've got my own sanding sponge that I can make on demand. And the really cool thing about it is that, and this is really kind of the main reason that I wanted to do this, is because these are great for the grits that you can get easily. But there are plenty of times when I want to use a different grit, or I want to go through a series of grits with a sponge. And guess what? I've got this whole stash of papers that I can now cut into smaller pieces and glue to the surface of a sponge. And so I've got basically unlimited sanding power at my disposal. And I like that. I like having options. That's one thing that I find always makes life easier in the workshop, is when you've got options and you're not having to force fit a tool into a particular job, because as we all know, that's when things can sometimes go horribly wrong. Now, I want to tie all this together by addressing something that some of you may have picked up on as I was going through these various options. And that is the subject of grits. Because I don't know about you, but I look at some of these and I think, okay, well, this right here, that's a 240 grit sanding sponge. I know that because it said so on the package. That's pretty much the only way that I know. Now, let's take a look at, let's see. Well, this is a 320 grit sponge, and this is supposed to be a 320 grit stick. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that stick looks a little finer in grit than the sponge does. Now, if you also compare this 240 grit sanding stick from UMP to the 240 grit sponge, again, I don't know about you, but to me, it looks like the sponge is coarser than the stick. Then you've got, okay, this is a 1200 grit sanding stick, okay, and this is also supposed to be a 1200 or an 800 on one side and 1200 on the other side grit sanding stick, which is labeled as ultra fine. And it looks, pretty close to the same. Kind of hard to tell the difference between the alleged 800 grit on this side and the 1200 grit on this side. But then you've got you've got here this 8,000 grit and 12,000 grit. And you've got these little pads here that are 4,000, 6,000, 3,600, 8,000, or 3,200 rather, 12,000. And I don't know about you, but my first instinct is, wow, if 1,200 is good, then 12,000 must be fantastic. I got to get me some of those. Anyway, it all becomes pretty confusing because we've got grits that look like they should be the same, but they have drastically different numbers. Or you have two sanding tools from different manufacturers that have the same number written on them, but look like they've got drastically different levels of abrasive. So what is the deal? Well, I'm here to clear it up. And this was after basically getting tired of being confused myself and deciding to go and do some research on the subject. So the first thing to know about sanding grits is that, like most things, these are things that are governed by standards organizations. And in particular, with sanding materials, you've got the ANSI or CAMI standards. Now, ANSI stands for American National Standards Institute, and you'll find it attached to all kinds of things: pipe fittings, electrical stuff, all sorts of things. CAMI stands for the abrasive, I forget what C stands for, but it's the Abrasive Manufacturers Index, I believe. Anyway, just think of it as the American standard for sandpaper grits. Now, over here, you've got the FIPA, or the Euro standard. Now, what FIPA stands for is the Federation of European Paper Abrasives. And they've got their own set of standards. And you can see that there's not quite a match. Okay, if you look at this, you can see that a P120 from Europe is not necessarily the same grit as a 120 grit sandpaper from the United States. Now, how do you tell the difference? Okay, well, the best way is when you're looking at the back of a piece of sandpaper and you're looking at the numbers on it, you'll see that there are oftentimes letters attached to it, okay? Like, for example, let me see here if I can find one. Well, none of these work for what I'm about to say, but they do make another point. If you see a piece of sandpaper that's got a P on the back of it, what that is a coated abrasive grade from the European standard, if it has a P. If it doesn't have a letter on it, then you can be assured that it's basically just an American standard. Now, the Japanese have their own standard, which is called JIS, which is Japanese Industrial Standard, and unless you live in Japan, you're unlikely to see that. If you see a paper like this that's got a CW on the back of it, that's the Chinese standard. And as far as I can tell, it's pretty close to the same as the European standard, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, the point being is that there's all these different standards, and so how do you make sense of all of them? What they've tried to do with this chart is tell you what the actual size in microns is of the abrasive particles. So, for example, the average diameter of a grain of abrasive particle on a European grade 240 grit paper is 60 microns. But look how much difference there is between the 240 grit from the US, from Europe, and the 240 grit from the American standard. It's only 50 microns in size. So that's a pretty substantial difference in the level of abrasive. Now, whether it makes any actual functional difference just kind of depends. It may or may not. You may find that they both work the same for you. You may find that one of them is heavier than the other. But the point being is, this addresses why you'll oftentimes see things that just don't make sense when it comes to these grits, even within a single manufacturer's product line. You can see that as you go further down on this chart, that the separation becomes even more dramatic. Look at the 400 grit from Europe. It's got a 42 micron particle size, and the 400 grit from the American standard only has a 30 micron particle size. So I think that you could say, sort of in general, that the American standard particle size is finer than the European standard particle size, for whatever that's worth. I will tell you that if you Google abrasive grit charts, what you'll find is that there's not any universal agreement, unfortunately, on what size grit constitutes each one of these abrasive classifications. For example, when you get clear down here to the bottom end of the chart, where you've got like a 2500 grit European listed as being only 9 microns in size versus 1500 grit American being 5 microns in size, you'll find that these very fine grits are shown as being anywhere from 1 micron up to what you see here on this chart. So again, there's really just no hard and fast rule, but this hopefully will help you make sense of it. Now, you may be wondering, well, what's the rest of this chart for? And this is where I think it gets interesting. This chart is from the Micromesh website, the folks who make these pads and the material for some of these sanding sticks. And they have apparently decided that they don't care what the European or the American or the Chinese or the Japanese standards are for grit sizes, because they're going to just make up their own. And this will definitely clear up some confusion for you if you've wondered why someone says, oh, just use a 8,000 grit micro mesh cloth, and you don't have any micro mesh, and you go trying to find something that's equivalent, and there's no 8,000 grit anything at your local hardware store. And this is why. If you look here at the bottom, okay, this is micro mesh aluminum oxide over here in this column. And you can see that they start at 300, and that's the equivalent of 180 grit on every other scale pretty much. And then it goes on down to their finest 12,000 grit, which is obviously finer than the finest that you'll see on the European or the American standard. But for example, 4,000 grit, which sounds really awesome, is in fact not any better for you than a 1,500 grit American sandpaper. So there you go. If you've ever been confused about sandpaper grits, and who knows, maybe I'm the only one, that is the answer. Okay, so there you go. More than you ever wanted to know about sandpaper, right? I find that craftsmen sort of fall into two categories. On the one hand, you've got guys who are like, I don't really care about those details. All I know is what works for me, and that's what I use. And then on the other hand, you've got guys like me who want to know everything in exhaustive detail about their tools. Look, neither approach is right or wrong. At the end of the day, all that matters is that you get the results that you're after. And I personally just, because it's the way I'm wired, I sleep better at night when I understand the tools that I'm working with. But as I said on my first modeling fundamentals video, don't mistake this for me telling you what you're supposed to be doing, because that's not what's happening here. My intent with this, with these videos, is just to kind of give you an information dump, and basically pass on all of the things that I've learned as I've gone along my scale modeling journey, and hope that maybe it's helpful for you in deciding what tools you want to use and how to use them in whatever your preferred way is to get the results that you are after. So don't think that I'm recommending any one of these things over the other, because again, this is very much a personal preference thing. So with all of that babbling, I will close out this second chapter of Rube Goldberg's model making fundamentals, and hope that you have found it useful and informative. And if you've put up with it for this long, as always, I definitely appreciate it. Much love.